I hope everybody had a good week. Usually we have people in this meeting, but it looks like people are otherwise occupied today. Unfortunately, that means if you have any questions, we'll have to do it through email. If I give the same question multiple times, I will do my best to answer it in the next time we get together. The midterms, today was the day that I'm supposed to put midterm grades in. And that was something I needed to just remind people about. Um, as I've said, everything is due at the end of the term. And so as I get caught up on grading, if things haven't been turned in by the due dates, I do put a zero there. But that is specifically so that Canvas can remind you that something needs to be done or turned in. If you are having issues, if you're having a hard time or you're stressed about classes and things like that, I would recommend heartily that you get a hold of the accommodations office on campus. They do a really good job of helping people through really difficult issues. And even if it's just some stress that you're dealing with, you don't know how you're going to coordinate everything and get your classwork done. What's nice about the accommodations office is that they will reach out to me and let me know what I need to do so that I can help you. One thing I do need to mention is I it seems like most weeks when we do these calls, I mention it and I people keep doing it anyway. But my computer will not read HEIC files. If you take photos with your smartphone and you don't format them properly, they will come through as an HEIC file, and my computer just doesn't read it. So that means that I have to put a zero there and just a reminder saying, please resend this as a JPEG or PDF. And then once you do that, most of the time it's just fine. I've also noticed that every once in a while somebody will put a really high memory file and submit that. Please try to make sure that your pictures do not take up a lot of memory because that just makes it so that the computer won't open the file either. And in that case, again, I have to put a zero down and I just remind you, please turn this in after you reformat the file with lower memory. Not a big deal on my end, but it is kind of a pain in the neck for you. I've also noticed that I thought Google Docs would be okay, but for whatever reason, it sets off alarms so that the my computer won't open it. It thinks that it's not encrypted, but uh, a messy file, or there's a high risk for virus or something, and it just won't let me open them. So if that's the case, again, just resend it in a PDF or a Word doc or something like that. Yeah, either one of those two should be just fine. I have noticed that doing the kente cloth things, you guys are coming up with some really amazing designs that are very impressive. You've taken a lot of thought as to what colors to use and what kind of design to make, and I really appreciate that. Now there are two reflections in the module on Africa. One is specifically about your thoughts on the kente cloth articles and videos you needed to watch, and the other is about the module as a whole. And when somebody has turned in that second reflection about Africa as a whole and the module, and they just talk about kente cloth, then I remind them, please resubmit it after you look at the whole module and after you revisit our Teams meeting. You don't necessarily have to revisit our Teams meeting for that module, but that reflection should be on the module as a whole, including our Teams meeting, not just the kente cloth. So that's two reflections. One is specifically on the kente cloth. The other one is about the entire module. Now, this week in our world tour, we are going to be visiting Renaissance, specifically the Renaissance in Italy. Renaissance is a word that has come to mean rebirth, and it signals or it signifies kind of a shared vision of the world and future that informs a lot of what happened during the Renaissance. This is from about 1350 to about 1600, and those are just really, really rough dates. But the Renaissance represents when people were just really responding to a number of different factors coming together all at the same time. We get the tail end of the Crusades. This is also a time when people are preparing for the Second Coming, and travel technology has been um, improving rapidly for several hundred years. And then we also get an influx of educated people, or education rather. Travel technology, up until this time, unless you are really, really, really intrepid, uh, traveling around to different countries, you're taking your life in your hands, and it was still quite dangerous. But instead of taking years to go somewhere, people could travel most anywhere in a matter of months. They It was really in government's best interest to uh, try to keep well-trafficked roads as safe as possible. So you have different groups of knights coming up during the Crusade period in Europe, that whose whole responsibility was trying to maintain order on the roads and keep people safe. And then you'd also have, because of the importance of moving people rapidly during a time of war, uh, travel technology was improving quite a bit. So it may seem like it takes a long time from our perspective now, but if you think about the idea that 99% of the world's population still lived and died within 22 miles of where they were born. And if you decided to go and travel somewhere, you were literally taking your life in your hands, and it may very well be that the people that you left behind would never ever see you again, whether or not you lived, because it just took that much energy and time to travel anywhere significant. And with the Crusades coming from about the 10th century up to the 13th century, it was very important for governments and the church to move people rapidly to the Middle East and North Africa. So that's how travel technology really increased. We see a birth of, or we see a significant growth in uh, ship technology and different things like that. That's one thing. Another thing is, for the last several centuries, people had been in Europe had been cross-pollinating with people in the Middle East and North Africa. This is also called the MENA region. That's MENA, which stands for Middle East, North Africa. This represented a lot of the Muslim world at that time. So you had the Christian world that was centered around Italy and the vast majority of Europe. And then you would have them interacting with a lot of the Muslim world, which at that time was a lot of North Africa and the near Middle East, the south and eastern shore of the Mediterranean and the areas around there. Muslims, that religion, for much of Muslim history, from the 7th century to about 1798, they were considered the most literate religion on the planet. So most everybody who was Muslim um, knew about reading, and a lot of people could read and write. And because of this, and also because it was important in the religion to learn about how things worked, uh, a lot of the records that are that European ancestors created, like uh, things that Plato and Socrates wrote down, the Greek philosophers, the Roman philosophers, a lot of that was held in trust by Muslim scholars and in Muslim libraries, while Europe was struggling to get its literate act together, so to speak. Uh, and with the sciences in the Muslim world, consider that 1,000 years ago, people were Muslim doctors knew about things like in, the effects of infection, how to keep things sanitary, how to do surgeries, that people survived. There's even records of, there's even a lot of evidence that people had traumatic head injuries that their successful surgeries were conducted on. This is 1,000 years ago, and people survived and lived for 20 years after the surgery was completed. And with that kind of science coming in, um, or being involved in the world that the Crusaders found themselves in as they were coming into these areas of North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. When they came back to Europe, they took a lot of that knowledge back with them, and this an interest in things like science and engineering and math, geometry, astronomy, and that coupled with the knowledge that Europeans already had kind of, well, it definitely caused an explosion of the natural sciences and observational sciences. This is where you also see people excited to engage in geometry and engineering of construction. Then we also get so those three things. Well, I guess that's two things, and the third one is um, as travel technology has improved, that also makes it and people are forced to travel through many different countries on their way to the Holy Land for crusade. As they come back, they realize how important it is to talk to their neighbors and get along with them. Because of that, you get a lot more communication between different groups of people. Uh, you don't have so much um, vested energy in insular society. It, people see the benefits of learning from each other. And so those three things: the cross pollination of culture, the cross pollination of sciences, and the increase in travel technology, really come together to help uh, develop a world where the Renaissance can happen. And then one of the reasons for the Crusades, they started in the 10th century, was because of an underlying belief that Jesus would return at the end of the first millennium. When that didn't appear to have happened, then the next date given was 1500. And so people started getting excited about that date coming up. And the church really helped to influence a lot of this growth that was happening in preparation for creating a wider world for Jesus to return in the year 1500. That's why we see that was one of the underlying reasons why the Pope interacted with Isabel and Ferdinand to fund the Columbus expedition to find another route to India. And coming to the Americas, the Spanish royal family got really excited. The Pope was excited because here was a new world with lots and lots of people that could be, um, I guess, invited is a little bit too kind of a word, basically forced to become um, Christianized to help prepare the world for the second coming. So that was a fourth aspect that really kind of fed into the Renaissance, this excitement for a new world. Before you really get into the module, there's one exercise that you have to do in order to open up the rest of the module. And this is to look at a painting that is pre-Renaissance and then a painting that was done during the Renaissance. Now I know we've talked about how our ancestors painted the way they did or created art the way they did for specific reasons, not because they were stupid and couldn't observe. We can see naturalistic and even photorealistic art all over the ancient world, but it wasn't that important to render things photorealistically. When we draw or paint something, we very rarely draw or paint what we see. We almost always create what we think about what we see. And you can see the importance of different aspects of religiosity or spirituality, different aspects of importance of politics or worldview, and that is what informed how um, realistic subject matter was depicted in the art of our ancestors. Now, in the Renaissance, what we can also see is with this expanding worldview of our ancestors in Europe at the time, there were it was kind of exciting for artists to explore new ways of sharing or showing their perceptions, and that's when we start seeing a very interesting change in the standard subject matters for art. How artists depicted that, and that assignment, you just need to look at two different paintings, and then talk about what the differences that you see. And once you submit that, then the rest of the module is opened up. I mentioned that until 1798, Islam was the most literate religion. The predominant faith of Europe at this time was Christianity, and many people were much more interested in living their lives than they were in learning how to read. Learning how to read was something that monks did because they're the ones that had the time to do that, or that had the interest in doing that. But that did not mean, by any stretch of the imagination, that our ancestors in Europe were idiots. Uh, that quite the opposite. In fact, you get balladeers or the traveling storytellers. Their function was basically to act as the newspapers of their day. And in many areas, it was mostly men. In other areas, it was mostly women that were the balladeers. And they would memorize, from our perspective, the equivalent of many dozens of books, usually telling these stories in verse. But that's how you got your news, with the balladeers. So they would memorize these long strings of information. And for one of the ways that the church would educate people is to use a device called typology. Typology is essentially visual storytelling. There were standard ways of expressing the different things that you could get from these stories. When we look at um, church windows where you see angels, you see figures from the Bible and things like that, how they are depicted and the stories that are related in these window images, that is called typology. And one of the reasons why it's called typology is because it was important for people to learn about the stories and apply them to their own life and see the stories as a type of living. So that's how the word typology, that's one of the ways it comes about. An expression of this is a lot of the time the divine feminine was shown with blue robes. And so you would get uh, a feminine saint with a blue robe. You could tell who she was by uh, what she was carrying. And an example of that is Mary, the Queen of Heaven, would either have a crown or she would carry a lily. Saint Cecilia, or Saint Cilia, was the patron saint of musicians, and she would be carrying like a violin or another instrument like that. So otherwise, these women would look identical, but if one was carrying a flute or like a viol, then and the other one was carrying a lily, then you would know which one was Mary and which one was um, Cilia. That's a simple example, but this typology had been infusing Christian art by the time of the Renaissance for over 1,000 years. So people were very comfortable with it, but that's how a lot of people learned stories of the Bible and morality and ethics by studying the windows that they would see in church as they would go several times a week. Today, economically, if you're an artist or professional artist, you get paid by the work that you produce. At this time in the Renaissance, wealthy families and leaders of the community, one of the ways that they would express their wealth and their strength in the society was by funding artists and masons, different guilds. Instead of deciding one day that you want to do, you want to be a writer or you want to be a musician or whatever like that, and you basically have to find your own way. At this time, there was the guild system where um, there would be a community of artisans, specifically working in a particular genre and or with a particular material. So you would have the Woodcrafters Guild, you would have the Stonemasons Guild, you would have the Glazer Guild, the glassworker, you would have bakers, you would have uh, different things like this where people performed a specific needed function in the community, and their livelihood would come because they would live as part of this guild, and these families or wealthy leaders would support um, these people as human beings as opposed to uh, by buying their work. So you would be paid to be an artist, and then you would be expected to produce while you were an artist, but your pay would not be different if you were in um, well, the pay would be different with your experience, but if you needed to study one day and produce another day, you basically would be paid the same, whether or not you were producing any specific work. What this translated to is a community where ideally artisans doing the same kind of work shared their knowledge with each other. They pooled their knowledge, and they would uh, it was very much in their interest to train people properly so that they could do things well. There's a book that I came across about 20 years ago that was written by a monk named Theophilus called On Diverse Arts. And this monk went around to the various guilds, saw what they were doing as the metalsmithers, the woodworkers, the fine crafters, the candle makers, all these different guys, the barrel makers, and he wrote down how they made the different things that they did. And that's a fascinating book. The Dover Publications um, has makes a paperback edition of it if you're interested in finding that out. But and you can see that the economy would be very much different, because if you are basically uh, provided with a living just for being a kind of person, as opposed to trying to sell your wares, then on some aspects it might be kind of restricting because you're kind of channeled into a life path, but in other ways that frees you up quite a bit to learn all the ins and outs of your trade. When we see the effects of the Renaissance start trickling down, then these guilds started becoming very interested in aspects of engineering and creating bigger and better things, and grinding different pigments, putting different things together, using geometry to lay out their paintings in a slightly different way than they had been. We, as human beings, we've always used geometry to lay out our artwork, but in the Renaissance, people were starting to write books about it and trying and showing that this is the math associated with optics. This is how we can define um, shape and objects within a particular space. This is how we can tell how far things are away from us. This is the kind of engineering that Michelangelo used, for example, when he carved his uh, famous sculpture of David, which is considered to be an ideal human form. But he used math and geometry. So when you're a tiny person standing at David's feet, around the height of his knee, you look up and it looks like a perfectly formed human being. So he learned how to use math and geometry to distort a figure just in the right amount so that from your perspective viewing it, it looked just right. This is where we start seeing an incredible growth of architecture and building as well. People building huge structures that were internally supported, and many of these structures are still in use, active use today. In a lot of religious architecture, I talked about, addressed this a little bit earlier. We have a base that represents the temporal confines of the earth, and it's usually a related to cube structures. And then we have the arches or the domes above it, which relates to heaven and the transcendent limitlessness of the heavens, or paradise, so where we aspire to go. And the Renaissance allowed people to explore engineering and geometry in such a way so that they could use those skills to build beautiful domes, beautiful structures that could support their own weight in ways that nobody had ever thought of before. One of the people that we're addressing is an individual named Brunelleschi. And Brunelleschi is considered an amateur. He wasn't really a, a lifelong architect, but he was an artist. He was an engineer. He was a self-taught architect, and he was so fascinated and enamored with these things that he wanted to build, these domes and stuff, that he even taught himself engineering to the point where he created the tools and the machinery necessary to actually build this stuff and put it into place. So he built everything. There wasn't, he couldn't go to the store and get stuff already. He designed and built it himself. So pretty amazing guy. And in this module, we are examining the Renaissance through the eyes of Brunelleschi, just examining how he made a dome. So as you work on this, there are two main elements to do. One is to construct a dome, and one is to write a reflection on the Renaissance. Well, I guess three main things. The first one is writing a reflection about the crux of the Renaissance. But after that, and the rest of the module opens up, we're going to be writing about what you're gathering about what the Renaissance means, but you're also going to be building a dome. Now, in this dome, there's lots of different options that you can do. And what I don't want you to do is download a kit from the internet. I have linked to a number of different videos, and you can do a lot more research on your own. One person who's already done this found something where they actually made like an onion dome, like we see in Eastern Orthodox Christianity used a lot of onion domes. The St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow is a famous example of the onion style dome. There's also a website that I want you to check out. I have not written it down. You can only find it through the magic of this video. The website is polyhedra.net. That's POLYHEDRA.net. You can go there and look at the different shapes, the different structure, 3D structures that you can make, and see if there's one of those forms that you can adapt to create your own dome. When you build this dome so that it can support its own weight, it's well constructed, you don't see any gaps in it or anything like that, and it looks like it will hold together pretty well, then that's what we're working at succeeding. So watch the videos, do a little bit of your own research, and then when you turn this in, you're going to need to turn in an image of the dome, but then you're also going to be writing a little bit about how long you did your research, how long it was to prepare everything, and then how long it took to actually build it together to make sure that it was stable. And there's a lot of different kinds of ways that you can make a dome. You can make the dome using cutting out several long, narrow triangles. You can make the dome using that polyhedra.net website, where you create something that looks kind of like half of a soccer ball with the pentagons and the hexagons together. But what I want you to do is do the research and try to figure that dome structure out yourself. And when you get to that portion of the module, it'll make a little bit more sense. Now, as a reminder, I am working on for the Iranian uh, visit next week. I am working on the portion where you're going to be doing a little bit more on your artist research. And so that's just a heads up. I'm going to get that done this week and tack that onto the module for next week. And I wanted to make sure that everybody remembered, don't panic if you haven't been able to turn things in uh, for the course and it looks like your grade is kind of low. That just means that I had to put zeros in for the missing assignments, and I had to do that to submit midterm grades. What is kind of nice about that is as you turn things in, then those zeros will be replaced with the points that you get, and your grade, you'll see your grade rise rather quickly. If you do have any questions about this Renaissance um, module, please email me. But remember to go through the whole module before you email me, because 9 times out of 10, a lot of the questions that you have will be answered within the module itself. And look at the links. If a link isn't working, copy where you see the link and then paste that into your browser window and see if that works. And if links still aren't working, then let me know and I'll see what I can do about it. See if I can fix that. There are a number of videos to watch, just a few, and I tried to find ones that were under 6 minutes, but there's some really fascinating stuff that you can find. I spent less than 3 minutes searching on YouTube, and I found all sorts of different ways that you could make domes, for example. Some very cool stuff. And again, no kits. We aren't going to be making domes from kits. You find something online that will help you, and you can decorate the dome if you'd like. You can put your own spin on it. We're using paper or tag board or even cutting up file folders for this project. We're not going to be using anything stronger than that. So if you turn in something that's you build out of Legos, after you bought like a Harry Potter set of Legos or something, don't be surprised if you don't get D points for that. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. And if I see the same question from a number of different people, I will make sure and address it next week. Just as another reminder too, although every person getting an A in this course, I haven't seen that they all have watched all the videos I'm sorry, that they have all participated on the Teams calls. What I have noticed is that the people that habitually get on the live Teams calls are almost always people who get A's as well. So you don't necessarily have to get on the Teams call when it's live, but you do need to watch the video after it's been posted. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I look forward to visiting with you again next week. Enjoy the module.